Hello, and welcome to our Uplifting Conversations. Really excited to be here with all of you today.
So this is the Uplifting Conversations with Deanna and Justin, and today we are excited to talk
He's Justin
about...
and I'm Deanna, in case you're wondering.
And today we're excited to talk about uplifting civility in a polarized world. So with polarization at an all-time high, how do we keep our conversations civil? During this event, we'll learn practical strategies to engage in respectful, productive dialogue across divisions. And whether it's in your workplace, community, or even your home, we'll explore ways to navigate these complex conversations with grace and purpose.
Now, one thing that we know for certain is that many of you are friends of ours, and we've had an opportunity to meet, whether it was IRL, is that what they say, in real life, or whether it was here on LinkedIn. So first of all, we just want to say hello to all of our friends. But also, we're hoping that there's some new people who have joined. I know this is a hot topic and something that a lot of people have been thinking about and asking us about. And so for those of you we have not had the pleasure of getting a chance to meet in person, wanted to start with just some quick introductions. As stated before, I'm Deanna Singh. I am the Chief Change Agent here at Uplifting Impact. And really, like, what I get to do every day is work with organizations around the world and with leaders and with teams and just amazing people who want to make sure that they're creating a space where everybody can thrive. And for me, that's so awesome. It's our company mission, but it's also the mission of all the people we get to work with. And so what we do here at Uplifting Impact is really do trainings, we coach, we do a lot of consulting, but at the end of the day, like if I had to put a big hashtag on it, in fact, if you want to hashtag this, that'd be awesome. But if I had to put a hashtag on it, it would be we hashtag human better. Like that's our whole focus is how do we make sure that we are humaning better? So I'm Deanna.
And that's Deanna. I'm Justin. So consultant, professor, facilitator, repeat mistake maker, retiring know-it-all, aspiring learn-it-all. And I'm happy to be here as well. And sidebar, we are not only business partners, we are life partners, have been married. We're going on our 20th year. We've been best friends since we're 10. We have 2 children, a 16-year-old son and a 12-year-old son, and we're excited to be here and learn together. So before we all do that, I'm sure you've had a very busy day, running all over the place, doing all kinds of things. Before we get into this topic, let's take a moment to be here and now. Do whatever you need to do to get here.
Now we know you're here, but to be here for real, for real.
So let's maybe take a breath. Welcome. Yes.
So there's a lot of things, right, that we could talk about when we're getting into this conversation about civility and what it means and how, we should be moving through it. But before we even kind of break that down, I think one of the things that kind of led us here was the fact that we're just in all these spaces, and whether we're traveling or whether we're talking to groups or whether we're in, ideation sessions with organizations, and over again, the topic keeps coming up with all the things that are going on in the world. And for those of us who are in America, one of the big things, it's what's happening in a couple of weeks, right? Our elections, that there is this stress, this like heaviness around how do I show up at work in a moment where I have maybe some really strong opinions, or maybe I don't have strong opinions, but I feel like I'm surrounded by strong opinions. Like, what is it that I can do in this moment to make sure that I'm still living up to my goal of making a place where everybody can thrive? And I think that that's tough. I don't think that we're getting it modeled for us, maybe in the ways that we remember it. I feel like there's not as much modeling of civility as when I was younger. And so really just understanding and feeling that pinch and feeling that stress is what got us into having this conversation in the first place. And that's what this can be, a conversation. So if you have any questions or thoughts or whatever, feel free to go ahead and pop them in the chat, because we are here to support you.
And I think kind of a valuable first step before we get into this conversation about civility and how to practice it is first to kind of concentrate and get into some real nuances of some characteristics about civility. So we can maybe start with a few things of what it's not in comparison to what it is. is. So I think it's important to note that one of the first things that civility is not, it's more than just manners. Manners has its place, it has its purpose, it has its importance, and that's fine. But I think it's valuable to think about going beyond simply being polite, simply avoiding conflict. But civility strives for bridging. And I love that term because if you think of two islands divided by water, there is a bridge that connects them. It reaches across the divide and still makes connections so people can come and go, they can meet in the middle, they can kind of exchange ideas, go back and forth. But it doesn't try to fill in the water between. It doesn't try to create similarity, to create sameness, which gets us out of actually engaging with difference and letting difference be what it is. So I love this idea of bridging of there's differences, there are divisions, and those divisions have their purpose. But we can still connect and still get along and allow the life-flowing water to go between us, and we can still reach each other on the other sides.
Yeah. And I think, the next one that's on here is this idea of tolerance. When we were little, isn't that like what we were kind of taught?
Mhm.
Like just tolerance, and you should be able to tolerate one another. And I think that one of the things that did, and sort of the opportunity that we missed in that, is that it didn't give us the opportunity to think about the next level.
Mhm.
Right. So when we're tolerating something, we're just dealing with it. We're just like, nah, okay, well, I guess it's here.
It's like grudgingly putting up with.
Yeah. Right. Like I tolerate something, as opposed to, no, I'm actually moving to acceptance. It doesn't mean that I have to take off like what I believe, or what it means that I can say, you know what, you have something that's different than me. I'm not just tolerating, like, yeah, you could sit next to me. It's like, no, I accept you. I accept the fact that you're different. And that's a huge kind of mindset that we want to think about too.
You can think about relationships and how often maybe sometimes we'll get romantically involved with somebody else. Like, I will tolerate that quirky thing about them until they tire out and realize that they should really settle down and be more like me. As opposed to, no, I accept you how you are. So another thing that I think is a nice, valuable compare and contrast with civility is, on one side, think about how many times, whether it's in conflict management or everyday conversation, you learned implicitly or explicitly, the goal is immediately to find common ground that has many virtues, that has a lot of importance to it. But civility goes above and beyond simply finding the common ground and ignoring all the things that are different ground between us. It goes beyond the ultimate end goal being, let's get to common ground, to let's actively create some new ground.
And I love this, right? Because when you're thinking about this and you think about how expansive it can be, because common ground is like what I already know. It's already in my comfort zone. But new ground means that I'm going into territory that's different. I'm stepping outside my comfort zone, right? So I think that's kind of, it's a cool way to think about it. You could think about it like in the metaphorical sense, but you can actually think about it in the literal sense too, right? If I'm always in my common stomping grounds, I'm not really challenging myself. But the minute that I go to a new neighborhood, a new country, a new city, a new state, like then I'm in a new space. I'm trying something new. So it's very cool.
And maybe the last difference, compare and contrast between what we've been used to or maybe trained to or socialized to do with disagreement versus civility, is oftentimes with disagreement, our goal is to argue. I will assert my opinion until I win you over. And the ultimate goal here becomes, I will convince you about how wrong you are. If only you had the education and knew what I knew, you would abandon your ways and be more like me. But when you're thinking about civility, there's a fancy 3-word term that I love to throw around a lot, which I think isn't just the definition of civility. I think it's also the definition of actual, authentic love.
So just FYI, let's just get real here, okay, for just a second, because obviously, right, we've been married for a very, very long time, and Justin keeps trying to convince me that instead of being like, I love you, he could be like, you know what, I really mutually divergent flourish you. Okay, I hope some of you have the same look on your face, because I love this word. I think the phrasing is really good, but I am not completely in the like, we can replace love with mutually divergent flourishing.
But I think that's important. Like,
it is important.
And you can see it here, versus the argumentation I'm trying to change you is, no, I want you to continue to diverge from me, and I want you to flourish in the thing that makes you different.
Yeah.
I might not understand it. I might dislike it. I might even have very strong negative opinions against it. But for the good of both of us, I hope you extend to me and I extend to you. I want you to flourish in the thing that makes you different from me for the benefit of everyone.
Yeah. And I think one of the things I really like when you say this, and I was teasing you,
I know.
is that it's like, I'm not trying to, it's not that I'm going at it with the goal that you have to be more like me or I got to change you or I have to win. I mean, I think a lot of times what we get into this argument, it's like, oh no, I got to win. But instead it's like, no, I actually want you to be more different. I want to find the things about you that are more different, because the minute that I appreciate that, I see that, I give that space, it means that I get to learn, right? I get to grow alongside you. And I think that that's just like such a beautiful, powerful way of thinking about relationships, as opposed to just being like, oh, I only like you insofar as you reflect exactly who I am.
So I think that's maybe the first step for civility, is kind of understanding what it is in comparison to how we've been maybe trained to approach conflict, disagreement, and difference. So let's go down through a few strategies about how to achieve the civility and to put it into action.
I'm going to tell on you first, though.
Uh-oh.
So I was like, okay, let's, do some strategies. Let's pick like, 3 or 5. I want to tell them.
You tell them.
I think we're at 35, friends. And we're not going to keep you all that time. We don't have all that time to go through each one of them. So if you're like, oh, we've heard Deanna and Justin talk about this before, they didn't do whatever. It's because we realized that when we put these all together, there was 35 of them that were tops, right?
And that just means that you'll have to come back and visit us another time to talk about more of them.
Absolutely. Okay, sorry, I had to tell you first, but.
So the first one is to slow down. Slow down. Think about when you are engaging in a conversation and you're engaging in disagreement. Probably the biggest difficulty is finding ways to not respond very quickly. So our number one step to civility is to slow down. And we got a few ways of doing that.
Yeah. So the first thing to do is to pause. In our family, what we say is take a beat. Take a beat. Right. So often when I get into trouble, it's because I'm talking too fast. Right. I haven't, we like to say, like, what's the distance between the thought and your mouth? And how do you extend that distance? Right. And sometimes there are moments where you need to have a detour. You need to give whatever it is when you're thinking and you're trying to express an opportunity to really get comfortable with it and understand what it is that you're saying. And so the first one, pause. An easy way to do that is to just say, you know what? I haven't thought about that yet. Or, that's an interesting point. I need a little bit of time to digest it.
My pause statement, and I think it's valuable to develop muscle memory. Mine is interesting.
Yeah.
Because what it does
you use
is
that with me a lot, sir. It's because I'm interesting.
But what it does is it buys you some time. It buys the other person time. It lets them know you hear them, but you're taking a moment. You don't rush into immediate response. Which brings us to maybe another thing after you pause is to signpost, which is almost like you have a street sign telling a person where you are going and what's happening inside of you. So it can be reporting on your internal status. I'm processing.
Yeah. And I think the last one, that we have listed here is to reschedule. So I think, when we first started doing this, and I will tell you that a lot of these things we've gotten a ton of practice from our children, right? But one of the ones that I think was really helpful for me and like kind of understanding how this could work, both at work and at home, was this idea that even though something is happening in the moment, it doesn't mean I have to respond in the moment.
Yeah.
Like I can actually just take a second and say, and even tell the person like, hey, this isn't a great time for me to respond to this. But I want to engage in this conversation. Is there another time that we could do this? Like, what are you doing tomorrow at lunch? Or what, maybe you and I could go grab a cup of coffee. Maybe just making sure that you are acknowledging, right? There's a conversation to be had, that you want to have it, but maybe this is not the right time.
And it's also good. It's a gift to the other person.
Yeah.
Who might be launching in and think that they are ready, but they are not at their highest self. There's something to Interesting. I haven't thought of that. Can you discuss this at another time? And we reschedule for an hour later, a day later, a week later. It actually gives us time to cool down, prepare, and be the best version of ourselves that we can be for this conversation.
And it's nice too, because you're not saying like, oh, I don't care what you said, or I don't want to have this, or you're saying, no, let's do it, but let's do it in a time that makes more sense.
All right. So that's one thing about slowing down, buying yourself some time. We gave you some phrases that help us quite a lot and hopefully can help you also. So our next strategy that we've got here is it's an interesting and surprising one. It is to get away from what we normally think the purpose of engagement and argument is. It's to have a whole lot of facts. I will show you how wrong you are. I will convince you and I will win you over by bombarding you with facts and figures. Well, we know study after study shows, especially when it comes to core beliefs and when it comes to things like politics, religion, and especially in the age of information, post-information, misinformation, and disinformation.
That's a lot of information.
Yeah, we got post, miss, and dis. It's very hard.
Yeah.
You'll spend most of your time arguing about the facts. And let's be clear, the fundamental thing underneath the argument isn't about the facts. It's usually about the feelings. At our core, humans only have a handful of sentences. It's usually, I am sad, I am angry, I'm afraid, I'm disgusted, or I am joyful. I am sad, angry, afraid, disgusted, or joyful.
Did anybody see that movie, by the way? Because it's like such a great movie. The movie about feelings.
Mm-hmm.
What's it called?
Inside Out.
Inside Out. I love Inside Out. But if you've ever had a chance to see it, and if you haven't had a chance to see it, I highly recommend it. But those are the emotions, right? Yep. In the first one, especially. And it's fascinating because when Justin first said this to me, reads a lot of psychology books, and he was coming back and he's like, oh, Deanna, there's only 5 real sentences. And not only that, but just FYI, these came from psychology books. Correct me if I'm wrong, but also from English, right? Just like the English language and like how literature is created. No? Oh, maybe not. Okay, well, let me not mess it up. Psychology. But regardless, this idea that like everything could come back to those statements. And then you start to think about it and you're like, yeah, no, actually that's pretty accurate, right? Like if I think about all the things that happen even in my day today, those 5 feelings are the ones that I might use more sophisticated words, but at the end of the day, that's like the core.
Yeah. And we use all kinds of sophisticated words. We act like the argument is about this issue. We act like it's about this policy. We act like it's about what was served at dinner. We act like it was all these other things. But no, at the core is I feel and I have an emotional reality, and I want to make sure that I'm able to tell my story.
Yeah.
And I want to make sure that people understand my story. So I think it's very important to, when you're beginning these conversations, is to start with the feelings and start with the story. Rather than trying to convince people of your data, start with helping them vibe with your story. So a few ways to do that. There's some prompts. Is you can start with your background. Think about the I was. Think about the opening segment of the movie or the television show or the novel, your beginnings.
Yeah. And I think that's a wonderful way to do it, because one of the things that we always talk about is if you're telling your own story, that's not a social media post, right? That's not a newspaper article. That's not a academic study. That's literally your own experience. And if we can say that we are close to expert in, or at least know a lot about something, it's pretty comfortable to say I know some stuff about myself or about what I've experienced or what my day has felt like or any of those things. And so I think that's just important to remember, because when you're starting with your story, it's like, I'm not starting with an argument. I'm just telling you literally what I know to be true of my own experience. I think that's one that's really important. I think another thing that's important is just really being able to say and articulate to people what you've experienced, right? So to say, you know what, there was a day where this happened to me. So this idea or these ideas that I have or these feelings that I have or these things that I'm really passionate about, they didn't come from the sky, right? I had a real experience, and that real experience is really informing the way that I come into this conversation. And that's important because it's not just is important because then the other person can have some perspective of where you're coming from. But it's also important because you need to hear that, right? You need to be able to articulate, like, yeah, I'm coming to this, and I'm not coming to this as like an independent person. I'm coming to this with a world of experiences and things that I've seen or know to be true in my own life.
And a key ingredient on the slide there is study after study shows the way to develop empathy and get people to develop empathy with you, especially along political divides, is to have your story and ground it into a moment of harm, where you experienced harm or hurt. You have to first establish trust and say, hey, there was this story. This is who I was in my background. This thing was going on. But then one day I experienced this pain. I experienced this negative emotion. I experienced this suffering. That is a key to establishing trust and telling your story. But then beyond that, it's not just enough to say, I was harmed, I hurt, I suffer. It's, I remain humble even after it. So some sort of admission of flaws, some sort of admission of shortcomings and gaps. These are two very key things to earning trust and empathy from others.
Yeah. And, I think in these conversations, sometimes we get to this point where we think, oh my gosh, I have to be right. And I have to be the loudest. And I have to have every piece of information and every piece of data. But the reality is, no, you don't. No, you don't.
Mm-hmm.
It's easy to just be like, hey, I don't know everything. I don't have all the information. By the way, I haven't read every one of these reports and I don't have all the facts and the figures. And to say that, right? And to own that, I'm basing it off of this body of knowledge, but I recognize that it's not complete. I mean, I'm going to be real wild here, but guess what? Justin, there's no way, even if we wanted to, we could read every single book, every single article, know every single statistic, understand exactly how the economy flows and what would happen in this situation versus that situation. We just cannot. Our brains don't have that capacity. Our lifetimes don't have that capacity. And so no matter what, we all are going to have gaps in our knowledge and flaws that are just part of being a human being.
And another ingredient about telling your story, the last one, is in addition to your background, a harm or hurt you have experienced, the humility that you're trying to retain is the hope. So even something as simple as the prompt, I am trying to. It shows I haven't gotten there, but for this conversation we're about ready to have, I'm trying to do this thing. So when you begin these conversations, after you find ways to slow down, your next thing is to tell your story. So in addition to telling your story, it's not just enough a conversation has two people in it. Otherwise, it's not a dialogue. It's just a monologue of me telling story after story about what happened to me. So another key element is to actually encourage the folks that you think are your opponents. So your dialogue partner, in order to make it as productive as possible, you have to do some active encouragement. It's not just internal things that I'm going to quietly and passively do this inside my own mind. You have to verbalize your encouragement of others. And we've got some ideas for you.
So an easy one. Thank you so much for sharing. That doesn't say, I agree with you. I think that what you're saying is absolutely right. You have changed my mind. No, literally, thank you for sharing. I mean, let's just think about it right now, right? It's so, is that a word?
Yes,
it is.
It is. I can tell you the Latin origins of it. Yes, it is.
But it is, right?
Yes.
People are afraid. People are afraid to have conversations. People are afraid of what's going to happen when they take a walk around their neighborhood. They're afraid of what's going to happen if they, overhear something in their cubicle next to them. There's a level of fear. I've been reading articles about people having real anxiety and having to take medication and things like that right now, strictly because of what's happening in the civil space. Right? That's really spurring on some physical reactions to it. So understanding that that's what's going on and knowing that that's the backdrop. If somebody comes up to you and wants to engage in a conversation and is willing to go into that place of discomfort, or they're willing to share, this is where I'm coming from, or this is my thoughts. Wait, what? Regardless of what comes out of your mouth next, thank you. Because that takes a lot of courage.
And I want to acknowledge how painful that can be. And some of the things that are coming out of other folks' mouths can be really harmful. So if nothing else, it's expressing thanks, thank you for sharing, as a way to slow things down, to kind of maybe get people into a better mindset, but also it has profound impact on you. So if someone is launching into something that's very hurtful, in a strange way, verbally expressing gratitude, thank you for sharing, actually helps you process it and actually helps you make peace with it faster. It's very difficult, and I want to honor that, but it is also, in a strange way, very helpful too. So the next thing, again, to encourage the highest version of the other person and to encourage them to open up and encourage them to also share their story, is thank you for sharing, and even throw in a one sentence compliment. I like how you, to almost evaluate the story, not necessarily the content of it, but I like how you reflected on that. I like how you framed that. I like how deep and introspective this must have been for this thing to happen. So taking a moment to, before we get into anything more difficult, to encourage and say, no, I am actually trying to meet you where you are. And I can even compliment, I like how you, whatever.
And the last one here is to empathize. You know, somebody once told me, like, you can't expect people to behave in a way that is different than how you are behaving.
Mm.
Right. So if I want somebody to listen and if I want somebody to understand or I want somebody to care, I have to make sure that I'm listening, that I care, that I'm showing that I understand. And so really thinking through, like, what does it mean for me to say, you know what, just taking a minute and saying, wow, you are really passionate about this. Wow, I've never heard a story like that before, or I didn't know that about you. That was really powerful. Or even that must have been hard to share,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's a, you just gave me a lot of information. Or wow, it seems like you really have done a ton of research on this, right? I'm just taking a minute again to recognize you as a human being.
And I like that, empathize, that phrase, that was powerful. Anything in the vein that shows your story has emotionally impacted me.
Mhm.
And because again, if our core sentences are, I feel sad, I feel afraid, I feel angry, disgust, or joy, we want to make sure, does someone see me? That is the primary motivation of all of our communication, and also the primary motivation of even some of our most fervent arguments. It's really, does someone recognize me and understand my emotional reality? And to simply take a moment and to empathize and express, you are not alone. All the pain and suffering you might be experiencing, all the anger, all the sadness, all the outrage that you're experiencing, your story has value and meaning, and it has made an emotional imprint on me. These are very valuable things to slow down the conversation, to kind of turn down the temperature and give us a chance to really relate as two emotional beings wanting to connect.
Do you remember when the kids were little, Justin, and you know, they would get frustrated with something? And one of the things that we would do, I don't know if you remember this, but we would like get down like this, and we would put our faces like this, like remember, like this, like so close,
Super close.
so close.
Yeah.
And then we would look at them and we would say, "It looks like," and whatever they were experiencing, "looks like you're having a hard time right now. You look really like you're frustrated.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like there's something that's going on that you're trying to say that's not coming out the right way. This must be really, really hard for you." Now, it might sound like I'm being, you know, redundant here, or maybe condescending or something. Obviously, I'm imitating a conversation with a child. Isn't that how I would speak to a coworker? But one of the things that was fascinating is that in those moments, you would see them go from like, right, about to have a tantrum to, yeah, I'm here with you too. Just thanks for, these are not words they would say, right? But you could see it on their face like, yeah, you're right. You're saying the things that I'm having a hard time saying. So if we know that those are the key words, like in rephrasing, it's, I mean, you seem like you're really upset about this, right?
What I
Like,
also like about the that was powerful is powerful can be all kinds of things. That was powerfully sad, powerfully angering, powerfully scary, powerfully disgusting, powerfully joyful. It's a neutral term, but it emphasizes there was an emotional impact on me without necessarily jumping ahead and say, oh, that must have been really sad. Like, no, actually, that was an awesome time.
Yeah.
So I
Oh,
like
that's
that,
true.
like taking
That's true.
into account, like, hey,
Yep.
I register that you have had a strong emotional impact on me, even if it's just, wow, that's something.
Hmm.
And it's doing something like, I'm not responding to your ideas. I'm not countering with facts and figures. I'm letting you know your emotions have caused emotions in me. And devoid of what we think we're trying to argue about, I want you to know we are both resonating and vibing on the same level. And we talk about this a lot. What's interesting in evolutionary human psychology is we are hardwired to get on other people's wavelengths. And if we do not, your brain will make you physically ill. Think about the last time you went to a wedding and didn't know anyone there. You walk into the crowded room, you start to sweat. You start to clench your teeth. You start to ache. Your stomach literally starts to make you feel ill because it says, get on another human's wavelength or danger is coming. And think about when you are angry and frustrated, you're like, does anyone understand me? It's your instincts. Some of the few that humans have is you better figure out how to have humans on your same emotional wavelength, or bad stuff's going to happen. Figure it out fast. So having this moment to say, we're vibing. We're emotionally on the same wavelength. We might disagree about a whole lot of stuff, but you feel emotions, and I recognize I am also feeling emotions in response. So beyond that kind of evolutionary psychological approach, there's also very concrete things to do and say. So
Justin, you keep pushing that button.
I know I keep pushing the wrong one.
I think he's trying to take me out. Poosh, like that. Look, I could just disappear behind it. Anyways, here we are. So the next one is to ask hosting questions. This is something that I think, irrespective of what kind of conversation you're in, or irrespective of what you're doing, of whether it's a conversation about what's going on in the world, or it's a conversation about what movie you're going to see this weekend, or these are some really good tips just in general, and just general having conversation. And the first one is being able to act as a mirror. And I guess this kind of goes a little bit maybe more to the example I was using before, which is like, I hear you saying this, is this right? Or like when I was with the children, you seem like, this seems like you're really frustrated. Is that right? Is that accurate? Am I understanding where you're coming from? Now, what I like about mirroring is that sometimes we get it wrong.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I will say like, oh, it seems like you're really frustrated. No, actually, that brought me a lot of joy. Okay, thank you. Because I was understanding this in a very different way. And so when you mirror and you get an opportunity, it actually gives you an opportunity to check yourself too, right? Like, am I seeing? Like, am I actually seeing the right thing? Or am I projecting my own self onto you, or my own feelings onto what you're thinking?
And the reason why we have here hosting questions is because it's different than all kinds of other questions that we're usually used to. Especially in a tense, argumentative, conflict-oriented. We'll ask questions, but they are probing questions where I'm trying to get to a deeper truth beyond what you're saying, or their interrogations, or their analysis. And I don't know about you, but I don't like being interrogated, nor do I feel like someone is trying to psychoanalyze me, because it seems condescending, it seems combative, and it seems aggressive, as opposed to, I am a TV host and you are here selling a new book, and my only job is to give you the platform to share more about where you're already going. So like you already mentioned the mirroring, I'm showing you that I'm trying to track accurately what you're saying. I'm not getting into something deeper. I'm simply saying, so you said this, is that right? I just want to make sure I'm understanding correctly. In addition to mirroring, there's this platforming principle that we talked about, and it's mentioning, you mentioned why. Can you share more? And I think it's essential that you do both of these things. You mentioned the lake house that you had as a child. Can you share more? You are not having jumping questions. That's something that I have to work on a lot. I get so excited and I want to know everything about a person, but I'm like jumping around them. And then they're like, wait, where's the next question? We're changing conversation so much, as opposed to the last thing I heard you say was this. Interesting. Can you share more about that? Where I'm simply guiding them to keep going where they were already going.
And that's important, right? Because what it shows, if you're actually practicing that, you can't do that unless you're listening.
Yep. And you're proving that you're listening. I'm trying to understand you rather than change you.
Yeah. And it's not like, because what does that sound like when you start jumping around? I mean, I know what it sounds like to me. It sounds like I'm on the next episode of Gotcha.
Yeah.
Right. And all of a sudden I start to get kind of defensive. Like, where are you going with this? What is the point of this conversation? Why are we talking about this one thing? And now we're talking about this other thing. Now you're coming back over here. Like, are you even listening to me? Or are you just spending all the time thinking about what next question you're going to ask me? Right. Like, these things don't actually relate. I mean, and to get even more whatever about it, if you're actually trying to have a good conversation with somebody and you're trying to understand, if you have them going all over that's like reading a book and reading the front, the end, the middle, the side, the back. Mm-hmm. How are you going to get to know the characters? How are you going to get to know how the plot is unfolding? How are you going to get to know the nuances if you're just flip-flopping through in all different places of the book? That's not going to give you the complete story.
Absolutely.
So I think that ability to like build on what people are saying and actually being invested in what they're saying, it's hard, especially if you're like all worked up.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things that, again, kind of builds that trust so that if you do it for them and you're modeling that behavior, you're much more inclined to get it for yourself too when it's your turn.
Absolutely.
Right? That's having a conversation. So.
And the last thing when it comes to hosting questions, asking hosting questions, is to demonstrate empathy. So it's like we talked about before, it's not assuming I understand what that was like or assuming the emotions behind it, but asking questions, what was that like? And notice that phrasing, it's really valuable. What was that like? It does not say, so how did that make you feel? Because we might not be that related. We might not be that close. That might be too much of a probing question. But someone saying, what was that like? They can make an emotional response. It was sad. Or they can make an evaluative statement that's more intellectual. What was that like? Hard. They can make a joke. What was that like? Oh, it sucked. But what it does is it shows I am trying to get not just your story and how it gives me more fuel to prove you wrong. And more than that, not just understand your story factually, like, okay, so I understand it word for word. No, I'm trying to understand your story as it actually is, but also the impact it must have had on you. And I'm trying to understand what the emotion behind it is. Because again, think about a vast majority of the conversations and conflict you have. It's really the point is, do you understand my emotional reality? And what was that like? Is one of those things that shows I am actually trying to understand you as an emotional being rather than an intellectual, philosophical, or political opponent I'm going to be.
And not only that, but you might learn something, right? Because that's the power of having empathy. Empathy allows you to go into a space or an understanding or to experience something that isn't your own. And so when you have that opportunity and you give yourself that opportunity, I actually think that's like where most of the learning happens. Like, I think that's where you get an opportunity to say, yeah, I guess I wouldn't have thought about it that way because I haven't had that experience, because I haven't had that challenge, because I haven't actually had to walk that pathway before. So I think that that's the beauty of it too, is that yes, it leads to better conversations and trust and all of that, but it also is, I think, the place where you can learn the most.
Yeah.
The place where you can kind of grow the most too. Tell me more. Wow, that is an interesting experience. Like, what was that like?
Yeah. So we've got one last strategy for you, and it is about changing what you do in the conflict, but also how you approach what a conflict is. And it is to shift from debating to co-creating. Shift from debating to co-creating. Most of us enter with the argument mindset. It is A versus B. And the decider, the goal is to come up with A or B. Only one of them leaves. Slightly higher than that.
That's not like a wrestling match.
I know.
Only one of them is going to
win. Slightly higher than that is tolerance.
which we
So
talked about.
you bring your A and I bring my B, and we combine them. It's a new AB, which is fine and noble, but it still leads to all kinds of defensiveness. But think about the highest form of civility is you bring your A, which has awesome stuff. I bring my B, which has awesome stuff. And let's co-create a new C that neither one of us had before this conversation began. If you go in not just wanting to be changed, not just definitely not wanting to change others, but wanting to create something new that neither one of you had, but both of you need, that's a completely changes the dynamic of these conversations of conflict and is the fundamental ground of civility. How can we co-create something new?
And I love this because there's some simple ways to do this, right? I think sometimes these like ideas, they seem like they're so complicated, or they seem like it's like so theoretical. And I think one of the things that Justin and I try really hard to do is make sure that we're sharing, like, no, it doesn't have to be that complicated. These are actually pretty simple concepts that we can use and things that we're already doing, but we can just do with more intentionality. So there are a couple of questions, right? Like, how can we, keyword there being we, how can we, you know what, I really, that's a totally different perspective than the one that I had, and thank you for letting me share my perspective too. How can we move forward? How can we understand other perspectives now that we've gotten to share our own? How can we be better? I mean,
How can
there's
we improve? How can we grow? And it
yeah,
says we're both doing this together. We're
yeah,
collaborating together, but we are moving beyond this. We're not here fighting it out to defend our status
nope.
quos. We're trying to create and move something bigger and better than what we had on our own.
So another one is what if we? Ooh, and I like this one because this is like trying to spur imagination. You know what? What if we? What if we decided that decided that we wanted to host a conversation? It's kind of how this happened, right? What if we decided that we wanted to actually share these different perspectives and invite other people into the conversation with us? What if we? So many things you can imagine. So many things. But what I love about that is that it really increases the idea that somebody can think of something creative, right? In the what if we question, you get innovation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's awesome.
And the last question that I like that we kind of brainstormed is what is success for us?
Mm.
What does success mean for both of us? Where it gets beyond simply saying, I'm here to win. It's no, what can we do that is mutually beneficial for both of us that we haven't come with yet, that we didn't enter this argument with? How can we build together? So I've had a lot of fun.
Thank you. Thank you for doing this, sir. I
Thank
appreciate
you.
it.
And
What if we got together and we had a conversation about civility? Look,
yes.
that's the result of what's going on right now.
And thank you to all of you for joining
Yes.
us. So
Thank
we
you.
got
Thank you.
a few things for next conversations. We would love if you joined us. We want to learn more together. So we have Uplifting Connection at a Divided Holiday Table. This was about civility heading into the election season. But you know, those conflicts, that tension doesn't just go away. A lot of us in the United States heading into Thanksgiving are around friends and family, and it can be very
Or any of the
tense.
holidays that are about to come up in this
Mhm.
time of year, there can be some people who are kind of getting anxious, right, about what those conversations are going to look like and what they might feel like and how they're going to navigate them. This is something that Justin and I have done some version of this. I want to say for like the last 4 years,
Mhm.
because again, it's something that we get asked quite a bit. It's like, I'm not really I'm looking forward to seeing my family, but I'm not looking forward to fill in the blank person that they're challenged with. So that's the one that's happening next. Then what we're going to do is we are going into the new year. We're going to be talking about uplifting language. We spend a lot of time just kind of conversing on what does it mean to have language that really does bring life into what we're accomplishing and what we're trying to do. So really quick before we let you go, though, I want to explain how these are going to happen. If you are here in the Milwaukee area, what we're going to be doing is opening up our new uplifting mansion and having people come to participate in the conversation. So we're still going to do it virtually because we know we have a lot of friends all over the world, but we're also going to be opening up the mansion. So if you're interested, please go ahead and register so we can make sure that we can get you all the information and you can join us either virtually or you can join us in person. We'll have some snacks and all that kind of stuff if you're here. We just want to make sure that we are really providing a service.
And we're going to post in the chat the survey link. And we'll also put up a QR code here so that you can scan, let us know your thoughts, new ideas, new topics to talk about. And also at the end of it is registration information for you to come on down and join us in person if you're available to. So thank you very much.
Yeah, so please feel free to just go ahead and take a picture. We'll leave it up here for a second, but to take a picture of this and to join us and share with your friends. The more, the merrier. We know that we can only be better and we can only actually uplift impact if we are doing it together. So thank you for your time. And thank you so much for what you are doing to make the world a place where everyone can thrive. Have a beautiful evening.